Welcome back sa Giant TV. Samahan niyo akong panoorin ang mga nagbabagang balita. Huwag kalimutan mag-comment at mag-subscribe sa aking channel. Pindutin lamang ang subscribe button para tuloy-tuloy ang ating update sa balita.
I got from the grapevine is that, and it seems to be very consistent, prior to the assumption of office of President Cory Aquino, Meralco was acquired by President Marcos government because Meralco failed to pay its maturing obligation. The reason being that there was a devaluation in the 70s and it is a loan from the World Bank through the DBP granted to Meralco, and that is the reason why the government acquired this company. And upon Mrs. Aquino's assumption to power, Meralco was turned over to the Lopez company on a silver platter. At that time, information points to the fact, Mr. Chair, that the Lopez company has only about 5% equity in that company. Mr. Chair, before the operation of the SPV, I'd like to ask the DBP representative, if it is fair enough to assume that these NPAs have been transferred to the Asset Privatization Trust.
Next to interpolate is Senior Vice Chair Congressman Boying Remulla.
Maraming salamat po, Mr. Chairman. Ito muna tatanungin ko ang DBP muna, no? Para malinaw lang. Diyan sa Mr. Herbosa. Is President Herbosa in?
No, only Nanyagas, Chairman ng 2002 to 2006.
Okay.
Kasi Remedios Makalintag, 98 to 2003.
Okay. Kasi ang anyway, anybody from DBP can answer, no? Ang DBP po ay isang pag-aari ng taong bayan. It's a state-owned bank. Tama ho, no?
Yes,
Attorney
Mr.
Adjong,
Chair.
no?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
It's a state-owned bank. Ang ibig sabihin, ang gobyerno ay pumasok sa banking, sa pagbabangko, at ang kapital nito ay nanggaling sa gobyerno. Tama ho?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Ang capitalization po ng DBP ay magkano ho ngayon? Ang authorized capital ng DBP, magkano ho?
Under its present charter, the authorized capital stock is 35 billion with paid up of 32 billion, Mr. Chair.
32 billion paid up. Pero ang sabi sa Wikipedia, ang assets more than 669 billion. Tama ho yun?
It's even higher, Mr. Chair.
Higher pa.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Maybe in the trillions already. Mga 1 trillion na kayo. Mahigit.
1 trillion as of end of the year.
And you're in the
Mr. Chair.
top. Kayo ay nasa pang-anim o pang-pito sa pinakamalaking bangko sa Pilipinas.
Number 6, Mr. Chair. In
Pang-anim
terms
na kayo,
of
no?
assets, yes, Mr. Chair.
In terms of assets. At ito ay dahil maganda ang pagkaka-manage ng bangko ng mga professional na nandito. Ngunit ang lahat po ng empleyado ng DBP ay government employee. Pwede ba ho natin sabihin yun?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
At ang hawak pong pera ng DBP ay pera ni Juan de la Cruz. Pera ng bawat Pilipino na nagbabayad ng buwis. Tama ho yun?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Ngayon, ang tanong dito kasi, pagka nagpautang tayo sa iba't ibang mga tao, inyong tinitingnan na kanilang credit, di ba? Kayo ina-evaluate nyo kung kaya magbayad nito mga kliyente na nangungutang sa DBP. Sigurado ho yun.
Yes, Mr. Chair. They are subjected to a stringent credit evaluation.
Stringent credit evaluation. No? Ngayon, ang original charter po ng DBP ay pautangin ang agricultural at industrial sectors ng ating lipunan. Tama ho?
The original, yes, Mr. Chair.
Kasi ang DBP tinatag pagkatapos ng gera ng World War II, 1947, tinatag ang DBP para sa reconstruction ng Pilipinas kasi wasak na wasak tayo ng panahon ng Hapon. Tama ho, no?
Yes, Mr. Chair. That's the history of DBP.
Yun ang history ng DBP. Ngayon, mula doon, nung panahon na yon, ano ho ang mga pagbabago sa mandato o sa mandate ng DBP? Bukod po sa industrial, tsaka sa agricultural, Mula sa industrial. Anyway, mula agricultural at industrial, ano po naging mandate pa ng DBP? Paano ho nag-evolve? Ano ho ang evolution niyan?
Mr. Chair, that would require for a review of the history, but maybe, Mr. Chair, presently, DBP has 4 priority areas.
Okay, 4 priority areas.
Yes.
Ano ho ito?
These are infrastructure, MSME, social services, and environment, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Yung 4 na mandates nyo, service yung inyong ano tawag doon? Anong tawag nyo sa mga bagay na yun?
Priority areas.
Priority areas. Saan ho pumapasok ang Lopez Group of Companies sa priority areas nyo?
Mr. Chair, we have to consider that the loans to Lopez's were given way before these priority areas have been identified by DBP.
Kailan na-identify itong priority areas?
If I can provide one, Mr. Chair, it most likely under this current administration, Mr. Chair.
Ngayon lang, binago ang kanyang...
With respect to identifying these 4 priorities.
Nung araw, kahit sino pa uutangin nyo, ganon. O wala kayong bawal, basta lahat pwede pa utangin nung araw.
Subject to...
Halimbawa, merong hong OFW, gustong bumili ng bahay, pwede ba sila mangutang sa DBP?
Mr. Chair, DBP is not, as far as I know, we are not into housing.
Wala kayo sa retail banking, hindi kayo nagpo-provide sa pangangailangan ng mamamayan na maliliit.
Except for salary loans, Mr. Chair. We are not into retail banking.
Okay. Kaya yung mga pangangailangan ng maliliit na tao, hindi talaga kayo nagsiservisyo.
Well, they can fall under MSME, Mr. Chair.
Oh, kasi ang laki-laki. Ilan ang branches ng DBP? 100 na ba?
We have 129 branches plus 11 branch-like units.
Ang kinakausap nyo mayayaman lang? Hindi kayo kumakausap ng hindi masyadong mayaman o kaya yung taong nangangailangan ng mangutang na mamamayan, hindi nyo kinakausap. Yung malalaki lang ang kinakausap nyo.
Mr. Chair, we are into developmental projects and it does not go into whether mayaman po or mahirap, but more of if they would fall within these priority areas and other programs of DBP.
Kaya kung maliit ang kailangan, ayaw nyo. Gusto nyo yung malalaking pautang lang.
Again, Mr. Chair, we have MSME programs for the those that would fall under that category, Mr. Chair.
Tinatanong ko lang to kasi ang ginagamit po ng DBP rito, dapat maalala ng tao, ang Development Bank of the Philippines ay isang bangko na pag-aari ng mamamayang Pilipino. Tama ho, no?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Kaya pag mayroon tayong nawawalang pera, o kaya may pagkukulang, o kaya mayroon nangyari na may napagbigyan, kailangan magpaliwanag ito sa taong bayan.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Bale, lahat po ng ginagawa ng DBP, accountable po tayo sa ating mamamayan sa lahat po ng ginagawa.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Ang COA lang nag-o-audit o kaya ang BSP sinusupervise, ngunit andyan pa rin meron na ba hong mga tao sa DBP na pumasok na demanda sa Sandigan Bayan o kaya na nakasuhan ng ombudsman o sinuspend ng ombudsman?
Mr. Chair, I cannot comment on that, Mr. Chair.
Hindi mo kaya mag-comment dahil sa legal services may mga bagay na pinoprotektahan nyo yung privacy ng mga inyong mga mamaya, inyong mga empleyado.
That's for one, Mr. Chair. And when officers of the bank are charged criminally, the legal services group does not represent them, Mr. Chair.
Pero alam nyo kung may nangyayari o wala. Alam nyo.
If we are invited or we are asked to participate, Mr. Chair. But as a matter of...
Minsan nababasa nyo lang sa dyaryo kung may nangyayari.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Ngayon I saw Dante Marcoleta on the screen ready. Maybe he can first ask the questions and then I'll just follow up later.
Thank you. Thank you, Senior Vice Chair Remulla. Next to interpolate is the Deputy Speaker, Rodante Marcoleta. DS Marcoleta. Unmute, please.
Maraming salamat, Mr. Chair. Good morning to everyone. Mr. Chair, may I direct my initial questions to any representative from Benpress Holdings Corporation?
Yes, Mr. Salvador Tirona and Attorney Quezon, the Corporate Secretary, Lopez Holdings. Please direct your questions now, DS Marcoleta.
Who is on board, Mr. Chair? Who among those mentioned is on board?
Yes, they are on board, the both of them, Attorney Quezon and Mr. Tirona.
Thank you. Anybody from those mentioned can answer, Mr. Chair. I'd like to know when was Benpress Holdings Corporation was incorporated.
Mr. Chairman, Benpress Holdings was incorporated in 1993.
1993?
1993, Mr. Chairman.
Would you tell us the reason, please, why only in 1993 was Benpress Holdings was incorporated?
It was incorporated to be a holding company for.
Why only in 1993? Is there any reason?
It was incorporated in 1993 to be a listed company to raise capital for the infrastructure projects of the Lopez Group.
Mr. Chair, the question is why only in 1993? Why not in 1990, 89, or earlier?
I cannot answer that question. That was a business decision, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Before 1993, how was it called?
It was there was no Benpress Holdings Corporation before 1993, Mr. Chairman.
What is the name of?
But there was a Benpress Corporation, which is the.
There was Benpress Corporation, but not Holdings Corporation. Is that right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Bakit po ninyo in-incorporate as Benpress Holdings Corporation? Who are the incorporators?
These were the family members of the Lopez, Mr. Eugenio Lopez Jr., Mr. Oscar M. Lopez, Mr. Sinakis, Mrs. Sinakis, Manuel M. Lopez. Those are the family members.
So these are the same members of the families that also incorporated ABS, abscbn Holdings Corporations. Is that right?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Lopez Inc.
Can you speak louder, Attorney Quezon?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Those are the family members.
After its incorporation, were there any financial ventures entered into with other companies?
I don't. Can you clarify the question, Mr. Chairman?
What is that, sir?
Can you clarify the question, Mr. Chairman?
Can you repeat the question, sir? Mr.
I'm asking the chair that after the incorporation of Benpress Holdings Corporation, if there were any financial ventures that it entered into with other companies. Let's say, I'm talking about financial deals and joint ventures.
Well, it had joint ventures with to create Maynilad. It had a joint venture with the French company.
Kung pwedeng pakilakas lamang po para...
It had a joint venture with a French company to create Maynilad, Mr. Chairman. Also with Bayantel, it had a joint venture with the 9X Corporation to create Bayantel Inc.
So if we say financial ventures with other companies, we also mean loans. Can you confirm that?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. How were these financial ventures financed?
Benpress had an initial public offering in 1993, so it had some equity fundraising. It also had raised its capital from through the LTCPs and through loan from borrowings from the bank.
Okay, are you in a position to furnish this committee or submit under oath the complete list of your financial ventures?
Mr. Chairman, can I refer this to Mr. Tirona?
Mr. Tirona, can you answer the request of DS Marcoleta?
May I clarify, Mr. Chairman, you're asking for the list of the joint ventures entered into by Benpress into the other companies?
Financial ventures na lang para mas madali tayo. Whether or not they involve joint ventures, but we are specifically more concerned about the financial ventures entered into by Benpress.
Mr. Chairman, the financial ventures, just like to clarify, the financial ventures would include a list of our creditors?
Yes, specifically the loans availed of.
Yes, with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman, we have submitted to the committee the list of our creditors for buy and tell, for Maynilad, and as well as the other companies that are currently being discussed in this committee hearing.
What is the time frame involved here, Mr. Tirona?
For example, Mr. Chairman, if we talk of the buy and tell, the time frame here would be, if I'm not mistaken, in 1995. We submitted the documents involved in the financing, which was called the Omnibus Loan Agreement, where all the financial companies that left buy and tell were listed in that document, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chair, can we assume that Benpress also absorbed financial obligations like outstanding loans of other companies it entered into, whether natural or juridical?
I'd like to clarify that question, Mr. Chairman. It's not clear in my mind what the question is.
We're talking of, let's say, when you entered with financial ventures, there might be obligations like what we had established earlier this morning on questioning of Congressman Garbin. Benpress assumed some obligations of Maynilad. So things like this, nature of transactions like this, we would like to know if Benpress absorbed other financial obligations of other companies you entered into. More specifically, whether or not these were entered prior to 1993. Are there cases like this, Mr. Tirona?
None, not that I know of, Mr. Chairman.
Yung sa financial obligations po natin, dahil sinabi kanina nung kasama ninyo that meron kayong mga financial ventures and we would like to know to what extent that these obligations have been secured. Kasi po kailangan nating malaman kung paano natin babayaran yung mga obligations that you entered into. Not only with Benpress itself, but also with those entered into with its affiliated companies. Paano po yung mga security aspects nito? Last hearing, I remember, Mr. Chair, that I asked if Benpress can submit yun pong mga contractual obligations so that we will be able to know from there ano-ano po yung interest rates, ano po yung mga collaterals na in-establish doon, because we will not be able to know this until and unless you provide us the terms of your contracts with the committee. Were you able to provide this? I know, Mr. Chair, that this is one of those I requested during the last hearing.
Mr. Chair, to answer that directly, yes, we submitted the documents referred to or asked by the congressman. This was submitted last February 16 to the committee. It included the documents for the loans as well as which included the list of securities and lenders of the loans, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Considering, Mr. Chair, that I have not looked into all these documents, may I just ask Mr. Terona if the government ever guaranteed payment of some of these loans? Was there any government guarantee, Mr. Terona?
There was no government guarantee on any of these loans, Mr. Chairman.
Sino po yung mga partido na involved dun sa mga obligations? Para ma-establish po natin yung collateral and incidental contracts, including deeds of assignment kung meron po.
Kung sa apat po na kumpanya na involved po, if we talk first of Maynilad, the actual contract, actual borrower is Maynilad Corporation or Maynilad Water Services Corporation, incorporation itself, and that carried a suretyship of Benpres. For Bayantel, it was Bayan Telecommunications Inc. that was the direct borrower, and this was secured by various mortgages. For Benpres, these were long-term commercial papers, Mr. Chair, so therefore it only had a negative pledge issued by Benpres to all the LTCP holders. For the Sky Cable, I'm sorry, but I cannot give you the details as I was, my colleague is not with us right now, Mr. Ventosa, but from what I know, the Sky Cable was originally a home cable debt, which was secured by a mortgage also.
Mr. Terona, your answers will be subjected to some evaluations anyway if this representation is able to look into the documents that you have submitted. You will agree with that, right?
Yes, sir.
Prior to the 1986 assumption into power of President Cory Aquino, were there any financial problems encountered by those obligations absorbed by Benpres? I'm assuming that even prior to 1993, when Benpres Holding is not yet incorporated, but it is a corporation, do you recall some financial extensions or absorptions given to any company affiliated with Benpres or Lopez Company that had encountered some problems?
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry, I cannot answer that because I was not connected with the Lopez Group at that time, and I have no knowledge of such.
Do you have somebody in your company today, Mr. Terona, who will be in a position to at least recall some of...
Attorney Quezon, do you have some input on this?
Mr. Chairman, I also cannot answer that question since I joined the Lopez Holdings only in 1990.
Mr. Aguilar? DS Marcoleta, can you repeat your question?
I was trying to elicit an answer, Mr. Chair, that even prior to or upon the assumption of power of President Cory in 1986, if there are companies affiliated with the Lopez Group either we call it Benpress Corporation, because Holdings Corporation was not yet incorporated at that time. Were there companies that have encountered problems already with the DBP?
We have no knowledge of any transactions that time. We're not actually with DPP yet.
So, Mr. Chair, am I getting an answer like DBP was not
I think
involved in the
this
transaction?
Marcoleta, the only record they have here is the loan in 1989, the Central CATV yun, no? Ha? Hindi, yung unang-una, loan. 95 pa yung unang loan daw na grant, buy and tell.
So, Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask the DBP representatives whether or not they know that Meralco was acquired by the government during the last few years of the former President Marcos for non-payment of maturing loans. If they know that.
We have no personal knowledge of such
Do you
transaction,
do
Mr.
you
Chair.
know that any information na government acquired Meralco?
I have no information, Mr. Chair.
Who has the information, Mr. Chair?
Maybe we can ask the SEC about the status of Meralco, if we can research on the SEC records.
Mr. Chair, we will do that. We will check the previous records of Meralco.
Can you submit through email or to the committee secretariat the history of ownership of Meralco?
Yes, Your Honor. From the available records with the commission,
Yes.
we will do that.
From the 60s to present,
Because, Mr. Chair,
1970s.
Okay.
the information I got from the grapevine is that, and it seems to be very consistent, prior to the assumption of office of President Cory Aquino, Meralco was acquired by President Marcos' government because Meralco failed to pay its maturing obligations. The reason being that there was a devaluation in the 70s, and it is a loan from the World Bank through the DBP granted to Meralco, and that is the reason why the government acquired this company. And upon Mrs. Aquino's assumption to power, Meralco was turned over to the Lopez company on a silver platter. At that time, information points to the fact, Mr. Chair, that the Lopez company has only about 5% equity in that company. Mr. Chair, before the operation of the SPV, I'd like to ask the DBP representative if it is fair enough to assume that these NPAs have been transferred to the Asset Privatization Trust.
Do you have information on the query of DS Marcoleta, DBP, Attorney Adjong?
I would have no information of such transaction, Mr. Chair.
Can we get any?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Maybe we can ask Attorney Quezon because he was a lawyer already in 1986. He was a lawyer already in 1986 and he already was lawyering for the Lopez's in 1986. Maybe he has a recollection.
Sorry,
Attorney Quezon.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I joined the Lopez Group only in 1993. I was
1993.
with another law firm in 1986.
You were with Sisip Salazar.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Anyway,
maybe
Mr. Chairman, I think DS Marcoleta is also referring to the reference point of this is the time that Meralco Foundation became a part owner of Meralco. And I think that Meralco Foundation was part owner, no, of Meralco, no? Attorney Kiason, would you know that?
I'm not really familiar with the.
Anyway, Chairman, I think we should research on this. We can actually ask.
I think we should get the information from SEC on the ownership from the 1970s to present. Can you provide that document within 2 weeks, sir?
We will do that, sir, based on our available records.
Thank you.
So we'll make our report based on.
And the DBP, may I direct any information on the what was mentioned by DS Marcoleta on the loan from the World Bank course through the DBP, if there is such, for the Meralco purchase?
We will check our records.
Yes.
Yes.
During the late 70s or early 80s.
Mr. Chairman, can we have a suspension?
Okay,
1 minute suspension.
suspension, 1 minute. Session resumed. This Marcoleta, we need to wait for the all available records to push on the questions you are asking. Are you
Yes,
amenable
Mr.
to
Chair,
transfer to another topic for the meantime?
In the meantime, I will just ask the representatives of DVP present if they really believe that there are no records of all these transactions of these transferred assets to the asset privatization trust. I think they know that there was such a thing as asset.
Maybe we can ask the president 1998. You want to ask Miss?
Yes,
maybe-
Mr. Chair. If the president at the time was there,
No, 1998, because she was the all present here are not members of the DBP during the 1990s. Maybe you can ask
Yes, Mr.
President
Chair.
Remedios Macalintan.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes,
can we ask the privatization and management office to be,
be
here,
invited.
to be invited, so they can shed light on this matter that DS Marcoleta is asking?
I may direct the COMSEC to invite the head of agency of the privatization and trust
And management office,
management office.
which is the successor of APT.
Okay, I think they're in Makati, na Legazpi Village.
Mr. Chair, I think I will also request the committee to invite General Francisco Gatmaitan, if he is still alive, because he was the one appointed by President Cory at the time when Meralco was.
We will research if he's still alive and we will invite him.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
General
Also-
who? General.
So I would like, if he is available, the committee should invite the former DBP chairman and former finance secretary Jesus P. Stanislao, because I think he would know
May
all
we
the.
invite the former Secretary of Finance, Jesus Stanislao?
He's also former DBP chairman, Mr. Chair.
Okay, we will invite him.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, DS Marcoleta. Next to interpolate is, before recognize the next interpolator, may I ask Mr. Salvador Tirona of Lopez Holdings?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, presently, do you have any active loan from a government banking institution, GFI?
Presently, we do not have, Mr. Chairman.
Are you aware of, because here in I was informed that there were several instances that the Lopez Group loans, the one mentioned here, the 4 loans, they have been asking for, they have been granted extension of due date, the maturity date. So they will not grant this if it was not requested. So why is this that you keep on requesting extension, but there was no payment?
Mr. Chairman, may I just clarify that this may have something to do with the Maynilad loan. The Maynilad loan was granted at 1 billion, and it was a bridge loan or a short-term loan. If I'm not mistaken, this was for 3 or 6 months. And every time that there is a maturity, that's a normal practice that finance people would sit down with the lenders and work out a renewal of the short-term loan. So that's the reason why for Maynilad, there were several rollovers or renewals of the loan. It was not an extension per se of the due date, but rather a renewal of a new promissory note.
Okay. Of the 4 companies that defaulted on the loans, 2 applied for corporate rehabilitation, Maynilad and Bayantel. Is this correct?
Yes, 2 companies went through corporate rehabilitation, Mr. Chairman.
So we can say that these 2 companies are already mismanaged because they cannot already they seek the help of the courts already. So we can say that these are mismanaged. Would you say so?
No, actually, Mr. Chairman, may I just explain that the defaults of the loans of Bayantel and Maynilad, which were the 2 companies that went into a rehabilitation, were affected by the Asian financial crisis. The effects of the Asian financial crisis affected these companies. No? And for Bayantel, it was not Bayantel that petitioned for the rehabilitation, but rather creditors represented by the trustee Bank of New York. For Maynilad, on the other hand, it went through rehabilitation because it was at that time that a arbitration committee's decision was given, and yet we couldn't resolve the problems we had with MWSS. That's why the company had to resort to go to a rehabilitation petition to solve the problem of Maynilad.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Tirona.